Tonight on Primetime Politics, a tariff reprieve. The auto sector is being spared from Trump's punishing 25% tariffs, told they will be excused for the next 30 days to give them time to move operations to the U.S. Coming up, we will speak with Transport and Internal Trade Minister Anita Anand to get her assessment on the situation. Also,
the letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table.
Ukraine is now putting its trust in Donald Trump, talking ceasefire and critical minerals after the White House cuts off all aid to the besieged country. We'll examine the impact of this major development with the National Defense Minister Bill Blair. And New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt on the need to move forward despite the chaos of the Trump presidency. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. North America's automakers are getting the duty-free treatment for the next 30 days, told their Canadian and Mexican operations will not be subjected to Trump's punishing 25% tariffs in that time frame. But there is a catch. Trump is not doing this to save them from economic pain, but to give the automakers time to pull up stakes, leave Canada and Mexico, then set up shop in the U.S.
Does he expect them to be able to shift production within a month?
He told them that they should get on it, start investing, start moving, shift production here to the United States of America, where they will pay no tariff. That's the ultimate goal.
Well, joining us now is Canada's Minister of Transport and Internal Trade, Anita Anand. Minister, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Great to see you too, Michael.
Listen, I feel like I should also introduce you as the Member of Parliament for Oakville when talking about automakers, because thousands of jobs in your riding are dependent on one particular automaker. Are you worried that the auto companies are going to listen to Donald Trump's call, pick up stakes, and move south of the border?
Listen, the automakers that I know, the workers that I know here in Oakville are very proud Canadians, and they share the sentiment that many of us share across this country, that we are stronger together, we have our elbows up, and we'll continue to work hard to build the Canadian economy and Canadian industry. So we saw that 1 month reprieve from the White House today, but we as a government are going to continue to push back. There's no halfway. We need to make sure that those tariffs are lifted. They're unjustifiable, and they are also contrary to the free trade agreement that Donald Trump himself signed in 2017.
And I also know, as we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday, that it will be challenged at the WTO as well as the CUSMA dispute settlement mechanism. But, you know, we've heard time and again how integrated the North American economy is, in particular when it comes to automakers. Are you worried that arguments, however well-formed they are not going to convince a president who is so American nationalist in his outlook?
Listen, I do continue to keep my hand steady at the wheel, as we must always do. But tariffs are not good for anyone. They raise prices, they slow economic growth, they increase unemployment, and they cut profits. So these 25% tariffs are going to be negative and very difficult for families and businesses and the American economy writ large, as they are for Canada. But there are states, Republican states, in fact, who are wholly dependent on imports to fuel their economy. Let's take Texas, for example. I met with one of the congressmen from Texas, and I'll say that Texas exports $35.9 billion in goods to Canada. It imports $37 billion worth of goods from Canada, and it has 763 companies employing about 74,000 Canadians. Let's just say we've got a lot of work to do in order to ensure that the impact of these tariffs are going to really be felt on both sides of the border. And sorry, that's 74,000 Americans, not Canadians, but let's just say their workforce depends on this bilateral trade relationship, Michael.
Now, one of the responses is, of course, dismantling internal trade barriers, a file that you are in charge of for the government. Where do things stand right now on that? Because I think Canadians are looking at that as one way of being a significant counter to anything Donald Trump may do.
Exactly. Well made. Point well made. $200 billion that can be delivered to the Canadian economy if we dismantle barriers to trade. And that's the work that I'm doing with the provinces and territories right now. The federal government has already agreed to get rid of more than half of the exceptions in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement signed in 2017. Those exceptions relate to things like procurement and financial services. The provinces and territories have their work to do now to decrease their exceptions in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. I'm encouraging them to be bold, and they are really unified in terms of the desire to mitigate the effects of Trump tariffs, to grow the Canadian economy without going through Donald Trump, and to diversify our internal supply chains.
Yeah, you know, I have to get back to Donald Trump here, though, because and I hear it's in the provinces, so we're going to be watching how that progresses when it comes to internal trade. But I wonder how we need to deal with Donald Trump, because of the many portfolios you've had, one of them, of course, was with defense. You're very instrumental in delivering Canada's part in the defense of Ukraine. We've now seen Donald Trump punish Ukraine. We've seen Donald Trump adopt Russian disinformation, praise Vladimir Putin, and talking about annexing this country. How should we deal and treat Donald Trump, given all that we've seen in the last few weeks?
We need to continue to increase our defense spending, and we need to reach 2% as quickly as possible. At the same time, we have to remember that we are together with Ukraine and most of the countries in Europe and around the world to stand in defense of the rules-based international order. Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty, but it is also standing up for that rules-based international order, for the concept of territorial integrity, which is so fundamental. And so Canada stands with Ukraine and stands with our allies in terms of defending the rules-based international order. And that's exactly what I did when I was in the defense portfolio, and what I'll continue to do.
What you'll continue to do, and in fact, and before we're done, I do also want to ask about your decision to run again, which is a change in course for you. How much of that had to do with the improving numbers for Liberals, in particular under potentially Mark Carney, who you have endorsed? Is that what motivated you to come back and run for re-election?
Not in the slightest. If you take a look at the statistics here in my riding of Oakville, it's a very tight race. There are definitely no guarantees here, and I'm going to have to work really hard to win my seat. So no, this was not a decision based on polling. This was a decision based on the existential economic crisis in which we are finding ourselves right now against the United States, and the need to lower barriers to trade in Canada, a file that I am leading. And my mom always told me to serve my country, and this was a time that I could simply not step back from. I need to continue to do my part, as do we all, in a very patriotic fashion for our country during this very difficult time.
Difficult indeed. Minister Anand, always appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Michael. Take care.
You too. Well, you heard me mention Ukraine with the transport minister, and today it was revealed the U.S. has stopped sharing information with Kyiv, which is significant because that intelligence on the movement of Russian forces has been critical in the defense of Ukraine. Now, Trump's national security advisor says the flow of information might be restored once Donald Trump is satisfied Ukraine's President Zelensky is making efforts towards peace. A process that was derailed last Friday after that contentious meeting in the U.S. Oval Office. But since then, the U.S. cut aid to Ukraine off, and President Zelensky, well, he is now taking a more conciliatory tone.
Earlier today, I received an important letter from President Zelensky of Ukraine. The letter reads, "Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians," he said. "My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. we do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time that is convenient for you.
Well, Bill Blair is Canada's Minister for National Defence. Happy to have him on the program this evening. Minister, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.
So, here we have Donald Trump pressuring Ukraine to end the fight with Russia. In so doing, he cuts off aid to Ukraine, cuts off intelligence sharing to Ukraine, criticizes President Zelensky, praises Vladimir Putin. Are you worried that the last 3 years are going to be for nothing?
I can't tell you. First of all, I think it's important to clarify Putin is the aggressor here. He's the one that illegally invaded Ukraine. And I believe President Zelensky has been heroic in standing up for his country and his people. And the work that he's done around the world and with all of us has been really quite extraordinary. Now, I understand the importance of working towards a peaceful settlement of that conflict. But we also believe very strongly it should be a just peace, a sustainable peace for the people of Ukraine, who have already suffered so much in the defense of their country. I believe that there is still lots of work that we can all do together to support Ukraine, including moving towards a peaceful resolution. And security guarantees from the United States are critically important to that effort. And so there's a lot of rhetoric right now and a lot of noise around this discussion, but I think there's some really important work that needs to be done for the people of Ukraine to secure their future, their safety, and I think to send a clear message to Putin that might does not make right, and you don't get to invade another country just because you want it and take what they've got because you covet it.
Are you worried, though? Because here you had President Zelensky just last Friday being berated in the Oval Office, and Donald Trump saying to him, you have no cards, you have no cards, you have to come to the table. Are you worried for Zelensky and what this negotiation might lead for Ukraine?
I have a lot of confidence in Zelensky. I worry for the Ukrainian people. And I worry for all of our European allies as well, who are also on the edge today. I'm worried about their security and their safety as well, because I believe that if this is not done right, it emboldens a person like Putin. It can embolden other autocrats and tyrants around the world. And so it's very important that this be a respectful conversation. I also think it's really important. Ukraine should be at the table, not on the table. And I think it's equally important that other European allies, including Canada, should be also part of those discussions. We are already working, our Prime Minister was in London on the weekend, working with a coalition of nations, the coalition of the willing, in trying to find new ways. If the United States wishes to withdraw some of their support, then I think that requires the rest of us look at how is it possible that we might be able to step up and provide that necessary support. There's still a really important role for the United States, and I hope that these discussions will lead to them coming back to the table as we require them to.
Well, in the meantime, we have the UK, we have France talking about having boots on the ground. Is Canada willing to put boots on the ground to be a security backstop for Ukraine?
Canada has communicated to the United Kingdom and to France and all of our allies who are part of that coalition that we're prepared to do our part, and that could include the deployment of our resources in Ukraine in the appropriate and right circumstances. We also believe that certain conditions need to exist, including those security guarantees for the safety of our people and for the safety of Europe. That's the work that's ongoing. But Canada has made it very clear we are among the willing, and we will come to the table and we will deliver capabilities. We're already deeply engaged in European security. We're leading the brigade in Latvia. We don't want to diminish those other commitments. It is challenging to respond to what is required, but we're going to do what is necessary.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes me wonder about the United States, because you talk about an authoritarian regime under Vladimir Putin. We have now the U.S. president embracing Putin. He also talks about annexing Canada. How concerned should Canadians be that the United States is no longer a reliable partner?
Frankly, I'm concerned by the rhetoric that we have seen and the intention and the imposition of these tariffs. I think it's become clear that the original justification for the tariffs, with concerns about the border, immigration, and fentanyl, although those are legitimate concerns, that was not the real motive behind the threat of tariff. And I think that it is threatening the prosperity, well-being, and security of our country in many respects. But at the same time, I've worked with the United States for most of my adult life, Michael, and I've worked with the FBI and the CIA. I've worked with the Homeland Security and their national security intelligence agencies. In our experience, there is great resilience, dependability and reliability among those institutions. Different administrations come and go. They have to operate under the direction that they receive from their executive. I think there is enough about that relationship that is worth fighting for, and I'm committed. I met earlier today with the commander of NORAD. NORAD has been keeping Canada and North America safe for over 70 years. We're still committed to that relationship. I have confidence and trust in that relationship, but that trust and confidence is being significantly challenged by the actions of the president.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned NORAD, and immediately I go to Arctic security because, of course, you just released, I guess, approaching a year now, the revised our defense policy with a focus on the Arctic. And I was speaking to Lloyd Axworthy, former Foreign Affairs Minister, and a couple of weeks ago, and he suggested that if we're going to really be serious about Arctic defense, perhaps our partners in the Arctic should no longer be the Americans. What do you say to that?
Not exclusively Americans. I think our first partnership is with Canadians. And I'm heading up to Iqaluit later on today to meet with the Premier of Nunavut. I've been on the phone today with the premiers of the Northwest Territories and of the Yukon. We're also meeting with the Inuit and Indigenous organizations up there because those are our real partners. And frankly, they've got so much to contribute to our sovereignty, our security, and the defense of this country. And we're going to be making some announcements about some of the investments we have to make. I think the Americans remain an important partner to the defense of North America and in the Arctic. But I also want to be really clear. We work already very closely with the Americans. I have hundreds of Canadian Armed Forces members who are working on an American basis. The Americans also want to work in Canada. That will not be done on an American base. It'll be done on a Canadian base, and which we will host our allies. But it's not just the Americans as well. We've reached out to other Nordic countries. NATO has recently seen the entrance of Finland and Sweden into NATO. Along with Norway, Denmark, ourselves, and the Americans, we now have the entire Northern Arctic, beyond what Russia possesses, is now a NATO frontier. We have an opportunity to work with our closest partners, not just the Americans, but with all those NATO countries, and in particular with the Nordic countries that I've referenced. That we have much to learn from each other, we have much to contribute to each other, and I think united we can do a better job. But Canada has to do its part. First and foremost, Canada has to step up, make significant investments in our own nation. Some of this can be not just investments in defense, but investments in nation building, because that infrastructure that we need to build there is going to support northern communities. It's going to create prosperity and opportunity in the north. I really believe that infrastructure is the key to our sovereignty and our national defense. And so those are investments that we're going to be making. And that's what I'll be speaking to about when we get up there. But it's also really important, Michael, that we do that, we have that conversation and we make that plans and we execute on our plans in consultation, cooperation, and partnership with the people of the North. I've heard and watched others who frankly, sitting down here south, and they come up with ideas in some political war room about what they think will be a good announcement. That's not the way to do this right. The way you do this right is you go and engage with the people of the North. I'm
quickly running out of time. I only have about 30 seconds, but I have to ask you though, because you talk about having to make the investment. And I think there was a time when the logic was, well, if we make the investment and procure American arms, that will satisfy the demands for more investment in NATO. Are we now shifting that to look at European procurement instead of looking at the United States?
I'm going to go and get the very best for the armed forces that they require. But Michael, we have a remarkable industry here in Canada. Our military industries, our aeronautic industries are second to none. I have been meeting with the CEOs of those companies in a series of roundtables to develop for Canada a defense industrial policy. I think there's huge opportunity for us to make those investments that need to be made, but to bring along Canadian industry, Canadian workers, to actually spend Canadian dollars in a way that helps the Canadian economy and employs our citizens. We're also going to be doing business with our allies, and there is some business that we, by necessity, will do with the United States, but our focus is on getting the best value for Canadians' hard-earned tax dollars. And I think one of the ways to invest those tax dollars appropriately is to make sure that we invest those dollars to support Canadian communities, support Canadian workers, Canadian companies, and the Canadian economy.
Minister Bill Blair, always appreciate the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Okay, let's shift back to trade now, because outside of the automaker reprieve announced today, the Prime Minister, well, he did have a phone call with the U.S. President, and out of it, this is what we heard from Donald Trump on social media, saying, Justin Trudeau of Canada called me to ask what could be done about tariffs. I told him that many people have died from fentanyl that came through the borders of Canada and Mexico, and nothing has convinced me that it has stopped. He said that it's gotten better, but I said that's not good enough. For anyone who is interested, he goes on to say, I also told Governor Justin Trudeau of Canada that he largely caused the problems we have with them because of his weak border policies, which allow tremendous amounts of fentanyl and illegal aliens to pour into the United States. These policies are responsible for the death of many people. Well, it is language like that and tariffs, both those already applied and those threatened to be applied, that is creating a lot of chaos and uncertainty for the Canadian economy, an issue I discussed earlier with the New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt. Premier, always good to see you. Thank you for the time.
It's great to be with you, Michael.
So, you know, as you and I are speaking right now, there's still a question mark of where the tariffs are going to be, whether they're going to be reduced, whether they're going to be amended. We have heard from the Commerce Secretary in the U.S. that might be happening. But talk to us about this chaos. What does this do to the New Brunswick economy when the mark keeps changing and the challenge keeps muting day to day?
Oh, you've nailed it, right? The uncertainty, and we've been experiencing this uncertainty ever since Trump first opened his mouth about tariffs in November. It's not an environment for investment or hiring or growth. So we've seen a real freeze and chill, not only across our economy, but actually across our society. People are scared and they're starting to wonder, what does the future look like when our nearest neighbor, our closest trading partner is attacking us? It's begged a real sense of like, okay, where are we going? Who are we going to be tomorrow? And can I be sure of my livelihood, of my opportunities in the future? So we are doing what we can to reassure New Brunswickers that their government is here to support them, that we're going to get through this because we are a rugged and resilient province and community. But the chaos in Washington makes that exceptionally challenging. Yeah,
challenging. I'm wondering if you were able to put a calculation on that, because I know that New Brunswick and your government has looked at the number of jobs that would be lost at a 25% tariff rate. But beyond that, the chaos that you're talking about, have you been able to calculate what that actually does in terms of jobs in the province?
Well, the estimate right now is around 6,000 jobs. 4,000 to 6,000 jobs could be lost based on the tariffs that were implemented Monday night. We have about 40,000 jobs out of, I should make it clear, it's about 350,000 sort of working New Brunswickers. So 40,000 jobs is significant, more than 10% of our working economy that are connected to this U.S. production. And so we think 4,000 to 6,000 of those are at risk of layoff. But it goes broader than that, right? We've seen our GDP growth forecast tank. Right? We built a budget that we have to table here in a couple weeks' time based on a certain growth forecast from economists that aren't even prepared to put that pen to paper, except that it's gone down. And so we're trying to forecast those effects so that we can make the right fiscal decisions for New Brunswickers, while other people are trying to figure out, what do I do if I lose my job?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, tough. And in fact, you did introduce a number of measures yesterday, some funding measures, support measures, but also measures that hits back on the United States. For example, New Brunswick no longer doing business with the U.S., stopping the sale of American alcohol in provincial liquor stores. What else are you considering at this point?
Well, everything's on the table, and there are some more drastic options that we're looking at. Obviously, maybe it's not obvious. New Brunswick provides electricity to Maine and companies and organizations in our neighboring states. We obviously are a big provider of fuel, whether it's home heating oil or gasoline, to a good 80% of New England and the Eastern Seaboard. Those folks are already experiencing the tariffs because the price of the pumps went up by 10%, and the price of their home heating oil went up, and their diesel and that kind of thing. So we could look at making that even more expensive. We could look at leaving our closest neighbors in the dark. Those aren't moves that we take lightly, but they're tools in our toolkit if this fight continues or gets worse.
Now, you also, to help the people of New Brunswick, unveiled tens of millions of dollars worth in support, and you also spoke to the First Ministers yesterday. Support was a major topic of that discussion, according to the readout I saw. So what is guiding your choices right now? Addressing direct financial aid or looking at public investment as a way to get through an uncertain time?
Well, it's actually both of those things. Our first priority is to New Brunswickers and the people who are worried about their business or their job. And we want to reassure them that we're going to be there to support them through these tough times, whether it's with the working capital they need to handle a decrease in revenue, or whether it's with the support they need to move from this job to that job and make sure that their family still has food on the table. So that's our first priority. But at the same time, we're looking at how do we diversify our markets? How do we get more productive? How do we get more competitive? How do we open up opportunities in Canada by breaking down interprovincial trade barriers, right? What are the things that we can do that will decrease our dependency on the US over the long term, but also help us through whatever prolonged period of tariffs we might experience? But we still need those jobs and that economic activity in our profits. We need to keep that activity going through this bumpy patch. So that's why we have a mix of both supports and investments in the future.
And will Ottawa be contributing to that based on your meeting yesterday?
That's the hope. We, as premiers, we always leave those meetings wanting more details, but we know they're ready to help workers with changes to EI accessibility and work sharing programs. We know they're ready to help businesses with tax deferrals and support for working capital. And so, and we know that they've also indicated that they're ready to support more trade development, more market development, and productivity investments. So I think we're going to continue to work as Team Canada across the country for many, many months to come.
Well, Premier Holt, I always appreciate the time, especially given right now how difficult it is to follow the bouncing ball. So thank you for the time today and speaking with us.
I'm glad I'm not the only one having difficulty following it, Michael. Thanks for that.
And you can watch my full conversation with the New Brunswick Premier on our YouTube channel. But that is our program for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.